Started here. Thank you, Lois. My name is Amy Glass, and I am the chair of the Nil Rock Professional Development Committee. I wanted to start off with this presentation just to show you the Nil Rock Statement of Inclusion that we have here. So we try to model inclusion in all our professional development opportunities. Hopefully you've been here and you have a chance to read this. So we will go ahead then at this point. So if we want to go ahead to the next slide. And so today's presentation is called Copyright Fair Use. It depends. Devon has just copyright and fair use on it. The presentation was originally scheduled to be led by Amy Pink, I believe, of Triton College, but she unfortunately had to back out of this presentation today. So thankfully, one of my colleagues, Devon Blumenshine, who's a reference librarian here at Illinois Central College, agreed to step in. Thank you very much, Devon. And you all realize that this being is recorded, so I am now going to turn this over to Devon. Thank you all for coming.
Hello. So like Amy said, my name is Devon Blumenshine. I'm a reference librarian here at ICC. So when it comes to what the heck does she know about copyright? I have taken the copyright class with Sarah Benson at UIUC when I was getting my master's degree, and then she also did a Carly workshop about copyright and Creative Commons licensing, which is where a lot of my info comes from, as well as my notes from that class as well when I was getting my master's. So you'll see that on the bottom of some of the slides if that's where the information came from. So in order for something, okay, let me tell you, I'm gonna go over what I'm gonna do. So I'm gonna talk about like what copyright is and then get more into fair use specifically. And then have some discussion scenarios about fair use, and then there should hopefully be some extra time if people want to, if they have any fair use issues or copyright issues that they need some guidance on or something like that. There should be time to talk about that at the end. So, in order for something to be able to have a copyright, it must have originality and fixation. This originality has to be at least minimal, meaning you have to make some sort of change, even if it's from another work that you're basing it off of. And it has to be some sort of creative change. And then the item also must be written down or recorded in some way, which could be a transcript of a quote. It can be a video or anything like that, a audio recording. A work does not have to be registered to have a copyright. Copyright is automatic. Registering your copyright could give you extra protections, and it has a little bit more sway if you don't want to get the courts involved initially. Say, hey, I have this registered copyright for this. Will you take it down or something like that? So you do not have to do anything to have a copyright, but it can be used as a resource to quickly prove a case of copyright infringement. I'm going to use the terms authors and creators interchangeably here because the law specifically says authors, but it's more creators because it also considers like art and things like that. So the author has certain rights, which are reproduction, distribution, derivative works, display, and performance. So these are the rights that they hold until something enters the public domain, and then their rights change. So the rights can be authored or licensed to the author of the material, or they are able to sell their rights to someone else. So this would be in the case of like academic publishers that or journals. A lot of times authors give their rights over to the publishing company. So if you were to ask the author if you could use their work, they might not be the one who holds the copyright. There are some different ways that people can negotiate and say that they still have the ability to give permission, or sometimes they don't have, they might think that they have permission, the ability to give permission for you to use their work, and then it turns out that the publishing company actually has the copyright and holds the right to authorize reproduction or distribution or something like that. So you definitely want to make sure that you're contacting the right organization or the right person when you're trying to make like a copyright claim. So let's see. Like I said, when you're asking for permission, um, you need to know who to ask, and sometimes that can be really difficult. That I have an example of that later, where I was trying to find something and didn't know who the creator was, so I couldn't ask them. Um, so also the default copyright length has changed over the years. So it used to be 95 years from publication of an item, um, and 120 years from its creation, whichever one of those happened first. Now that has changed to the life of the author plus 70 years after their death. So that does make it a bit longer, in most cases. Um, Unless you published something when you were like 5, it would probably make it longer. Even if the author has relinquished their rights to a publishing company, the 70-year timer starts from the original creator's death, not from the time that it was sold to the publishing company, which is a little bit different. So before it was 95 years from when it was first published. Now, even if it was published 95 years ago, but the author lived another 50 years, it's still within copyright at this point. So everything that will enter the public domain, which is when something like the copyright on an item has run out, it would enter the public domain. They do so on January 1st of each year. So everything that you will see for copyright of items is going to be on January 1st. So we saw a lot of Great Gatsby derivative works with the characters and stuff like that published on January 1st of the year that it went out of copyright and into the public domain. So here is an example of something where part of it has entered the public domain and part of it has not. So Winnie the Pooh in his original style, the one on the left, public domain Pooh, he was originally published in 1926, and so the old laws apply. So the version of Pooh with the red shirt did not appear until 1932. Both were sold to Disney in the 1960s. However, the red shirt version did not exist until a little bit later. So if you want to create derivative works of Pooh Bear, you can do that with the original. But if it's wearing the red t-shirt, which is the version that Disney uses, and that's their version that they have trademarked and all of that kind of stuff, you can't use the red shirt version. So if you've seen the new Pooh Bear horror movie that's coming out, they use a old example of Pooh Bear and then put a red button-up shirt to get around the recognizability of the Disney version, because that still will not come into the public domain for many years. So the other thing that you might be thinking about is, oh, well, Mickey Mouse is pretty close to the same age. When it comes to major companies like that, they have the ability to trademark some of their characters. So, for example, Mickey Mouse, who would enter the public domain from a copyright standpoint in the next 15 years, you still won't be able to use Mickey Mouse because it is trademarked, which is another way that businesses can protect their intellectual property and their brand image. So Mickey Mouse still won't be available for public use. Oops. There we go. So when we want to use a copyrighted work, there is kind of an order of operations to follow to make it the easiest on yourself, because the ones towards the bottom are a little bit more difficult. So first things first, one example that I'm going to go through all of the steps that I did when Amy was looking for a picture of Octavia Butler for our One Book, One College promotional posters for this year. We wanted to find a good image that looked nice and was easy to use in the quickest way possible. So I kind of went through this hierarchy to figure out how are we going to use this. So the first thing we did was check to see if there are any photos of Octavia Butler in the public domain. She has not been dead for 70 years. So anything that was taken while she was alive would still be within copyright. And we couldn't find anything that had specifically been placed in the public domain because artists are able to place their own like images and stuff like that if they want to, but they don't have to. So I had to move on to the next thing, which was Creative Commons licensing. So authors can add Creative Commons licensing to their work and put it as a part of the Creative Commons so it can be used by others under certain conditions. Sometimes they make the condition that you can't make money off of it. Sometimes they only allow certain kinds of work to be made with it, stuff like that. So we did find one image in the create in with a Creative Commons license, but it was not very good. It was blurry and we couldn't really use it for our promos the way that we wanted to. So we had to move on to the next step, which is exceptions. So some of the exceptions that we looked into would be like doing commentary, or doing a parody, things like that have copyright exceptions. And there are some others, but we couldn't find one that worked for us using the image. So we went to fair use, which is another kind of exception. It's a very specific exception to copyright, which is the one that we use the most in libraries. It allows us to use a portion of a creative work under certain circumstances. For example, we scan books for ILL requests if it's one chapter, and the book is like the only copy. Fair use allows us to make a copy of that chapter and stuff like that. Unfortunately for us, it was a bit iffy whether our use counted as fair use because it was going on promotional posters and being used for the marketing of these events, even though they did not cost money. It was kind of iffy. So I had to reach out to Octavia Butler's estate. And the reason that you don't want to do this is, like I said before, sometimes people don't own the images, or copyright to their work. Sometimes they will ask for money, which we had $0 budget for for getting access to these photos. And sometimes they can just straight up say no. So if there's an exception, you want to try to do that first so that if they say no, you already have a reason that you're able to use it. So I reached out to the estate to ask if there were any photos that they would allow us to use, and they got back to me same day and said, "What is it for?" I explained that we were at community college, what we were going to use it for, and they ghosted me. So I never heard back from them, which is kind of one of the reasons why it's frustrating asking for permission. So we did not get a picture of Octavia Butler to use on our promos. So I wish that that would have happened. So on the right here, these are just some general things. So anything published before 1928 is in the public domain because it's covered over the old copyright laws. And like I said, that happens on January 1st. Libraries specifically have an exception as well, where they are allowed to make copies of works, unpublished works, after 100 years instead of 120 years, just for preservation purposes. And then Creative Commons licensing, only the person who created the work can add the Creative Commons license, and it's irrevocable. So if they put that Creative Commons licensing saying, I want this to be in the public domain, I created this item and I want people to be able to use it, and then they see, oh, a lot of people are using this, I actually wish I could make money from this now, they can't take it back once it's there. So you can make it less restrictive, but you can't make it more restrictive. So, like I was talking about with the exceptions, fair use is the most common exception that we use here. So this is the Section 107 of the U.S. Copyright Code, which provides parameters for the legal use of copyrighted material without permission of the copyright holder. So there are four main factors that are considered in this determination. So, I'm going to go through just like what they are real quick. And then in the next slide, I have some more in-depth information as to what exactly that means. So the purpose and the character of the use, including whether the use is for commercial, or if it's for nonprofit or educational purposes. So that is what are you going to be using it for? The nature of the copyrighted work is what was the original work? Was it fiction? Was it nonfiction? Was it creative? Was it just straight up informational? The third thing is the amount or substantiality of the work. So that means like, is it the most important portion of the work as related to the work as a whole? Are you using one page of a 500-page book, or are you using 500 pages of a 500-page book? That makes a difference when you're determining copyright exceptions and fair use. So the last factor is the effect of the potential market for or value of the copyrighted work. So if you are going to make a copy that is going to stop people from buying, a large number of people from buying copies of that item, and you're doing it for your own reasons, not for scholarly purposes, that factors into whether you can use fair use or not. So there is no magic answer whether as to whether or not something is fair use, and there are a few common misconceptions as to how much of something is considered fair use. Some people will say that it's 10%, some will say it's one chapter, but it's not that simple. So one district court tried to create a 10% standard using precedent. So they had a case come to them and said, okay, well, we're going to apply a 10%. If you use more than 10%, it's not fair use. If you use less than 10%, it is. And that got thrown out on appeal because fair use exists for people to be able to use it, and 10% isn't always a good answer, depending on whether you're using the most important 10% of that book or the least important 10%, 15% of that book. It's there's not a correct answer with that. So this is the ALA's, it's published on the ALA's website, and it's a checklist that they recommend for figuring out if something falls under the fair use exception. So if you or your colleagues are ever having trouble figuring out is using this item in this way fair use, you can fill out this. They also do have a version available on their website with sliding scales, and then they have a place to type in your justifications. And this isn't a form of registry or anything like that. Like, you're not registering your fair use, but it's more for your own evaluation, and it can show that you put in a good faith effort to make sure that you were doing the right thing, which librarians can be protected from being held personally liable for monetary damages. So if they were exercising a good faith effort. So basically, if you still could be held liable for copyright infringement, but you couldn't be held liable to pay them the money in damages as a librarian. But I'm not saying just go out and copy everything, and because you're a librarian, it'll save you. That's not the case, but it does help in a case of making a good faith effort. So at the top of our list, we have our first factor, which is purpose. So if you're using something for educational purposes, news reporting, placing it on a website with restricted access, such as a Canvas page that only your students have access to, um, and some other factors. These all favor fair use, but if you're wanting to use it for commercial activity to make money, if you're denying credit to the author or profiting in some way, these all go against fair use. But having one of these factors does not automatically make it not fair use or automatically make it fair use. Like I said, it's kind of a scale, and you're balancing which side you think it falls on. So the nature refers to the type of the work that you're copying. So if it's factual information and is published for others to be able to see, then it is more likely to be fair use. So when you're copying factual information, people should have the right to facts and data, so that is more likely to be fair use, whereas unpublished works like your personal diaries, your letters, manuscripts, anything like that is a lot less likely to be fair use because they weren't necessarily intended for wide distribution unless it was being distributed by the person who created them. Um, it's also significantly less likely to be found as to be fair use if it's a creative work like art and music, fiction, and plays. Something that requires like creativity is less likely to be fair use. So, the next portion is amount and substantiality. So, if you are using a small portion of a work or a part that is not particularly central to the work, then you are more likely to have a case for fair use. This is like what allows us to quote from authors without it being copyright infringement. And it is also important to consider what part of the work you're using. So if you're using one page of a 500-page book, but that one page has all of the most important information, then it's less likely to be fair use, but you can still make your case for other reasons. And then the last factor is the effect. So these are the more long-term effects of using the work. For example, if you're making a copy of a part of a book that you legally purchased to do personal annotations on, that's a lot more likely to be fair use than if you were going to copy an entire textbook and place it freely online, which would replace the sale of the textbook for students who wanted to buy it. Then they don't have to anymore. So this is one of the aspects that allows libraries to make copies of work that are still in copyright, but are unpublished and things like that. Sorry, um, you still can if it's a library that's making copies of its unpublished works, and if it's making it only available to their patrons who come in person versus online, factors like that. So that is kind of my overview. If anyone has any questions, I can go over them. Otherwise, we have some discussion scenarios for everyone. So I can move on to that slide so we can see what that looks like. So for the first discussion, a professor wants to post a scanned chapter of a short story collection on their openly available website for their students to access. The chapter contains the entire short story, which had been previously published on its own. Is it fair use? And there isn't necessarily a right answer, so that's what we're going to discuss.
If you've got microphones, you can go ahead and speak up or go from there.
I would say that's not um, because it's the entirety of the short story and it's on an open website.
I think another thing available that makes me a little fair use on it is the openly available website. That's a big point right there. So
Anybody else?
and I see that we have some people in the chat, not fair use and not fair use. Um, Jerry just said considered not fair use. Thomas made the same point that I did, available on an open website as opposed to a password restricted LMS.
Okay, but this could make it part of the question. So what if it's a story that is itself out of copyright? So like it's a story by Mark Twain.
I think in that case, then it probably, if the story itself was in the public domain, unless it had specific commentary, in the short story collection, or like it was annotated or something like that, then I would say if it's like a Mark Twain story, then it would probably, be just like available for them to access. And that would be okay. Also, I'm not a major expert in the field, so I'm not giving legal advice, so don't go and copy a Mark Twain short story and post it on the open web.
When Amy Pink said this, what proposed this, she was like, and tell them, make sure to tell them, I'm not a copyright lawyer. I'm not a copyright lawyer. So
Me neither. I
does
couldn't,
anybody else? I was going to say, does
sorry.
anybody else have any other comments on that one? And go ahead, Devon. You can say whatever you were going to
I
say.
was just gonna say I was having trouble getting my unmute button to show up, but I was gonna say we can move on to the next one. So, a monetized streamer wants to post a 3-hour video in which they speed run the entire video game Overcooked with their personal commentary on game aspects. And if anyone has any questions about any of that, I can answer that as well.
Devon's our gamer around here.
I don't know if I'd go that far. Casual gamer, maybe.
I'm not saying anything on this one because Devon and I talked about this one earlier.
So I'm gonna say yes because it's their personal, like, speedruns of video games are very common, and if it's not focusing on the video game but focusing on the commentary, I think that becomes it's something that they can post.
That would seem to make it transformative.
So what if it didn't have the personal commentary?
I would be questionable about the monetized portion of the streamer.
I don't have like a correct answer for this. Normally, video game companies don't try to get those videos taken down for copyright infringement, mostly because it's free advertising for them. So there haven't been a ton of cases that have gone to court. It's generally considered that because of the personal commentary that it is fair use. But not having personal commentary, there hasn't been a specific case that I could find where they have been sued successfully for having a monetized stream of them playing the game.
Could you explain what speed running the video
Oh,
game is?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
one of the comments was most likely fair use if they don't show the entire game but parts of it.
Okay.
So is there a connection there?
Yeah, so when you like speed run the entire game, it basically means it would normally take someone 20 hours of work to finish this game, and they play it super fast and they finish it in 3 hours. And people make a lot of game videos like that. And that was what made me think of it because I see those all the time on like suggestions and stuff that like if you were playing a game, it's like I finished the game in 3 hours and didn't die at all. And so it's a 3-hour video of them playing the game all the way through with all of the content. and all of the intellectual property of the game being shown.
And then Valerie says she's thinking not fair use in that case, but because she's thinking the commentary makes it a new creation. So, yeah.
Yeah, so we can move on to the next one, which is kind of a goofy one that happened in my real life. So my sister is big guinea pig fan. So she went to Walgreens and printed off a bunch of images that she found online as guinea pigs as famous works of art for a gallery wall in her home office. The Walgreens workers were like, "Do you hold the copyrights for these images?" And she was like 15 at this time and panicked and was like, "No." Um,
Can I ask a question?
yeah, go for it. Go for it.
By gallery wall, do you mean a physical wall or do you mean something online?
Like physical. Like she printed them off to have in our house.
Okay, then I would say that's totally fair use because that's personal use.
Yeah, we have in the chat that Brian also admits that he's been stopped by Walgreens, the Walgreens police for copyright images. And Valerie says, I'm thinking as long as she isn't selling them and they are her own personal amusement, that's probably fair use. And I tend to agree with that. Christmas cards? Really, Brian? Yeah. And Katrina says fair use unless she purchased them from the creator. But Brent Eckert says fair use because it's for personal use only. I tend to think that the personal use just being on her home wall makes a difference with that. So I have never been stopped by Walgreens, but I've been stopped by I think it was Shutterfly for something. So, and they were like, nope, sorry, can't do it.
And this has not gone to court. So there's not a correct answer here. I can see both sides where people are saying that like she didn't do anything to it. But also because it is just for her to have on a pinned up on a wall. Um, I can see both sides. So Walgreens thinks that it's not.
Morgan says I recommend printing at home next time.
Yeah, high schooler did not have a lot of thoughts going on in her brain at that time. And then, so here's our fourth one. So, a biographer wants to paraphrase large portions of the unpublished letters of a famous author who is still alive. These letters are available to the public at a university library, but were not authorized for reproduction.
I think we've got a stumper.
It being paraphrased, I'm not sure that's enough. If they're not authorized for reproduction, is what I feel like that's not. I don't know.
Paraphrase is super tricky too, because it's very, very easy with paraphrase to slip over and make mistakes. And as a librarian, I wouldn't let. If they asked me, I would say no. I would say they needed to contact the person who wrote them and donated them and get permission.
A lot of the comments in the chat are saying the idea of large portions makes a big difference here. So if it was just a summary, it might be okay.
So for the question of if the author gave them to the library, did the author stipulate how they may be used? Was there a contract signed? So I don't think there was a particular contract signed, but they didn't. It was the author who did not. This is a real case. So it was the author who didn't authorize the reproduction, not the library. But I don't know if there was a specific contract signed.
I think most people are saying not fair use in this instance.
So this was a real case. It was J.D. Salinger versus Random House. So the defendants, which is Random House and the author of the biography, reproduced, this is from the opinion, reproduced, quoted, or paraphrased several of Salinger's unpublished articles, which their recipients had contributed to library collections. So the people who received the letters from J.D. Salinger are the ones who contributed them to the library collection, not Salinger himself. When he learned that they had used the letters in the biography, he registered the letters under his copyright and filed a lawsuit seeking an injunction to stop the publication of the book. He appealed the court's ruling after the court said that it was fair use, and the appeals court found that because the letters were unpublished is the major point, that a more limited scope of fair use was required. So considering the fact that they were unpublished, the court ruled that this strongly weighed in the favor of J.D. Salinger and the amount and substantiality of the portion used as well. The court determined that the defendant's use favored a finding against fair use because it was excessive for unpublished letters, and it would even the paraphrasing and quoting could have significantly had an adverse impact on the market for J.D. Salinger's letters, especially since the defendants copied virtually all of the most interesting passages of the letters, is what was the exact quote. And that was all of the discussion points that I had. But if anyone else has any that they've found interesting, or if you have one that you're questioning at your library that you want kind of everyone else's opinion, can put that in the chat or turn on your mic, whichever.
I have one. It's not a specific instance. It's more of a question. When you were going over the Creative Commons license, you said that it couldn't be revoked. But that it could only be like Creative Commons the license could only be added by the author or creator. What do they have to go through to add that Creative Commons? Like, could somebody try to do that to somebody else's work? And then what happens if it can't be revoked?
So when it comes to Creative Commons licensing, whatever the original work had, you can't make it looser than that, even if you're someone else using it. So if it came from the author and the author had a non-commercial license, Creative Commons license on it, and someone else made a derivative work that they wanted to be able to make money off of, the original person could sue them for copyright infringement. I don't know if there's like, I mean, so the Creative Commons has a website, so the creator of the image would be the person who posted it, so they would be able to change the licensing on there. But I don't think that someone could, unless someone hacked into their account, like change it for them or like pretend to be them to change it. And if the original person could prove this is what I put on there and this is what I intended, then they can't take it back. So basically, you can't take back if you want to make it more restrictive, but you can make it less restrictive.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Comments? If not, thank you, Devon, for leading this discussion and very informative. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you for all who have attended here. There will be a recording of this presentation sent out in the Nil Rock mailing list in the next few days. In the chat, I put a link to a feedback form. The Nil Rock Professional Development Committee is always looking for informative and, feedback to improve our presentations. And then finally, I would like to announce that our next webinar will be on Thursday, November 30th at 10 a.m. The title is Spring Sharing is Caring. We are asking for people to use any of the Spring Share products, LibGuides, LibCal, any of the LibChat, LibAnswers, any of those to come. And it's going to be more of a discussion with sharing of tips, tricks, what you don't like about some of the Spring Shares, things like that. A couple of people have asked specifically about LibCal. So if any of you are LibCal users and have ideas on that, please come and attend for that. More information will be coming out on this in the next few days. So other than that, thank you all again for attending. Thank you for Devon for doing this, and everybody have a great afternoon. Bye-bye. And